Hello and welcome to A Week Past Sunday with me, David Hooks. Just time for a quick recap of the week. First up tonight, China, a country whose human rights record people like to complain about, while tweeting or posting on Facebook about it from their iPhone, in a house full of cheap Chinese goods wearing clothes made in, you guessed it, China, or Vietnam, Indonesia or Thailand. The Chinese Premier Xi Jinping, or state-appointed leader to give him his proper title, was in London this week to meet David Cameron, in the first visit from the one-party state in over 10 years. While there, he saw the sights, met the Queen, had a big banquet, and signed roughly £30 billion worth of business deals. There was a potentially £2 billion electric bus deal for Alexander Dennis in Falkirk, and a controversial nuclear deal for the Chinese to invest in the Hinkley Point station. Now, Hinkley Point is more than 10 years late in the planning, and was originally scheduled to be online by 2017, but EDF, the French state-owned company, couldn't find a partner to replace Centrica, who pulled out due to concerns about rising costs and inaccurate budgets. Costs which have now soared to an estimated £24 billion after an original estimate of around £18 billion. The Chinese companies will actually only invest £6 billion initially, with EDF later winding down their ownership over time, leaving the Chinese with a 30% stake overall. But there are also further collaborations between the French and Chinese, with 2 more plants planned. EDF will take the lead in the second of the 3, and the Chinese will design and build the third. Now, concerns have been raised in America about the security implications of allowing another nation such unfettered access to Britain's nuclear power stations. But there are also financial concerns involved. Electricity prices have broadly been falling, as the low price of renewable energy has driven down the wholesale price. Yet the government has agreed to pay £96 per megawatt hour for the energy from the plant, roughly double the current marketplace price. Now, this will be index linked, with the UK taxpayers making up the difference if market prices are lower. Now, the estimated subsidy could be up to £17 billion over the 35 years of the contract, and that's only the agreed price subsidy. The Austrians even described the deal as Soviet, and for a Conservative party that purports to believe in free market economics to agree to such a level of state subsidy that they do not seem to give to other industries is interesting in the least. The UK government doesn't believe UK state-run organisations should run public services, but they're quite happy to allow French state-owned company and a communist state build and run key infrastructure in the UK energy grid. Instead of borrowing the money and building the station themselves, they have instead set up huge subsidies to encourage other states to do that for them. The story has been about the Chinese investment, but the reality is that the UK taxpayer was just signed up to pay potentially huge subsidies, both from their general taxation and from additional charges on their energy bills. All this after withdrawal of much smaller subsidies caused renewable energy firms to have to pull out of potentially beneficial projects, and even causing some to fold. At a time when the world is pushing for clean, cheap, renewable energy and efficient battery storage, this type of high-cost deal is a potential waste of public money, as well as giving the Chinese, the world's top hacking nation, let's not forget, access to your nuclear power stations. Now, moving slightly on, but in a related story, while the Chinese leader was being coach-driven around London, British Steel was having the final nail driven into its coffin. The announcement of the closure of the Tata plants in Scunthorpe and Motherwell may have been serendipitously timed, but it was by no means an overnight fall. Much has been made in some media outlets about the steel used in the building of the new Queensferry crossing, with around 21,000 tonnes of steel overall and more than 14,000 of that imported from China. Never mind that the Tata plants did not make the type of steel required, nor that they only indirectly bid for some partial contracts, some of which they won after a French supplier was forced to pull out. But there was a definite hint of SNP should have done more about the coverage. Now, not only does this ignore the tendering process, but it is also fundamentally naive as to the true causes of the collapse of the industry. To put that 21,000 tonnes into context, since 2000, Chinese steel production has increased by 695 million tonnes. That's just the increase, not the total output. That increase alone is almost 8 times the amount of steel made in the entire United States. And since the start of this year alone, China has exported over 67 million tonnes of cheap, high quality, government subsidised steel. Now, the American government has done little to help its industries, and the EU has done all but nothing, despite Labour arguing for months in the European Parliament that something needed to be done about Chinese dumping. Now, illegal dumping to some is simply getting rid of excess stock to others, but in these quantities, China is effectively driving competitors out of business. While some reporting outlets in Scotland may have an SNP-centric view, the reality is we exist in global markets. Ravenscraig, the only plant in Scotland that could have made the grade of steel required, isn't there anymore, but even if it was, it too would be under threat in the current conditions. China is an economy built on stilts, and they are in danger of cracking under the weight of expectation and false figures. Moving on now to EVIL, English Votes for English Laws, and never has a more racist sounding motion or such an appropriately acronymic nomenclature been passed in the UK Unitary Parliament. The same biased media classed English Votes for English Laws as SNP MPs being denied a vote, and suggested they were simply grievance hunting, which ignored the fact that Welsh and Northern Irish MPs were also to be excluded. All told, 270 MPs of all opposition parties voted and spoke eloquently, some less so, about the dangers of introducing these changes. There were some unflattering descriptions of the Scots, with Labour's shadow leader of the House remarking that the changes handed yet another grievance to the Scots, and Lord knows they don't need another grievance. However, it is worth noting that what these changes actually are and what they mean. On the face of it, they are in fact rather conservative measures, which introduce a further ascent stage where only English or English and Welsh MPs will be allowed to vote. The decision as to which bills will take this more circuitous route will ostensibly lie with the Speaker of the House, but the party which raises the bill will indicate whether they believe it to be England only or not. It will then be up to the Speaker to agree or not, which will require them to analyse the bill and take a potentially partisan position. Now, the current Speaker, as we know, is John Bercow, a man of exquisite eloquence and possessed of an encyclopedic knowledge of parliamentary procedures. But someone of his calibre cannot be guaranteed to occupy the chair in perpetuity. There is no measure of recourse, so once the Speaker has deemed the bill to be England only, no Scottish MPs can challenge that view. Now, here's the truth. Scottish MPs should not be voting on matters that only relate to English law. To do so when the competence is completely devolved breeds understandable resentment from English voters and MPs. It's the same as we experience here when we see that laws are put into practice that we didn't want. We feel these are being forced upon us, and although the desire for quid pro quo is perhaps strong, principled self-restraint on voting on devolved matters is a more respectable stance. Let's look at a specific example. Assisted suicide is a competence completely devolved to the Scottish Parliament, and a bill to legislate for it was recently rejected by the Scottish Parliament. There was also a bill for the same type of law in England. On the face of it, this is an England-only bill, and Scottish MPs should have stayed out of the voting while feeling free to engage in the debate. There is an argument to be made, though, that allowing assisted dying in England while it was illegal in Scotland would put pressure on the Scottish Government and would almost certainly lead to Scottish people with terminal illnesses moving to England. This would therefore suggest that Scottish MPs should vote on such a bill, as it would impact or potentially impact their constituents. But English MPs had no such reciprocal say in the Scottish legislation, and if Scotland did pass such a bill, it would have a commensurate deleterious effect on the UK government and lead to English patients moved to Scotland. So there is an existing democratic imbalance, and it is important for the Scottish voters to understand why people like John Redwood have been campaigning for so long for English MPs to be protected from Scottish votes imposing legislation on English voters. But the reverse argument falls on deaf ears. They simply cannot understand that to vote down every single one of the amendments to the Scotland Bill raised by Scottish MPs, not just SNP, highlights the democratic imbalance just as starkly. The UK is constitutionally creaking at the seams. A party with the support of barely a third of the electorate are currently imposing their ideology on the entire UK, and these changes, however small, mean that on measures the government decides are England only, they will have an overwhelming majority and be able to push through any measures they like. Because if a measure is denoted as England only, the Conservatives don't have a majority of 12. They have a majority of nearly 112. There are maybe a few Tory rebels here and there, but nowhere near enough to counter that scale of majority. Make no mistake, this measure isn't about an English voice. It's about a Tory one being allowed to do whatever it likes and to hang with the consequences there might be on the rest of the Union. That they have a thumping majority in England does indeed give them a mandate to make whatever changes they put forward. But the fact that 318 out of 326 Conservative MPs come from English constituencies makes it clearer than ever that the constitutional setup of the UK is not fit for purpose. English votes for English laws is like trying to fix a compound fracture by breaking the other leg. It all but bars a Scottish, Welsh or Northern Irish MP of any party from ever holding an office of state or ever being Prime Minister again. This may suit the Conservative Party initially, but it is a poison pill which will slowly eat at the flesh of that compound fracture, leading to gangrene and eventual amputation. And finally tonight, phone hacking. Not the kind where journalists get to listen to celebrities leaving kissy-kissy messages for each other. No, this is the kind that allows the government to access all of your documents, takes control of your phone, and can track you wherever you go. The original so-called Snoopers Charter really only served to bring electronic communications up to the same level of scrutiny as we have for telephone calls. It was about allowing the police or prosecutors to produce a timeline and highlight connections between other criminal groups by allowing them to draw a timeline of events and see the dates and times of calls, emails and other digital communications. This new bill, though, gives the authorities the power to access and hack telephones remotely, read information, access webcams, download files and basically take over your entire electronic life. This is in response to the fact that authorities cannot currently force you to provide your password or to unencrypt files if you choose to withhold permission. Now, if a file is encrypted with RSA 2048 or higher, you can have any law you like, you're not going to crack it, even if you are the government. But the powers given to security services under this proposed bill are potentially terrifying. Yes, they are supposed to be anti-terror laws, and are supposed to apply to suspected terrorists, and there is ministerial oversight at present. But here's the thing. Once laws like this are introduced and powers over citizens of this magnitude are given to the authorities, they can't seem to help themselves from using them. Like when councils were found to be using anti-terror laws to stalk and film parents they suspected of trying to get their kids into the wrong school. Or when anti-terror laws were used to stop a peaceful protest at the UK Arms Trade Fair. Or when a journalist was detained at Heathrow over some documents on his laptop. There is no reason to believe that these laws won't be abused just as any other laws are. Now, I have no issue with the proposals in the original Snoopers Charter, or so-called Snoopers Charter, where the authorities could find out the dates and times of calls and texts so they could more readily connect criminal gangs. But this level of intrusion cannot be allowed to pass into law. Security, we have been programmed to believe, is a balance between civil freedoms and giving up some of those civil freedoms to let the government spy on us. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Well, you know what? Everyone has something to hide, even MPs, and everyone should have a right to privacy. So lobby your MPs and tweet as much as you can to raise awareness. We are not just sleepwalking into a police state, we're in danger of being convinced it's a good idea. That's our show. Thanks for watching, and please follow me on @PoliticsScott. If you'd like to join us for a slightly more detailed investigation of the Gers figures and why you shouldn't really believe a word you see in them, please watch our next video. Thanks very much. Good night.